Couple of quick, just for those of you who have not been through my seminars before, I always try to make sure that I'm including some information that's of added value for you, so that when the information that you're walking away with it's not just checking a box for work, that hopefully there'll be something that I say that will resonate with you, that'll make sense, that'll maybe be able to help yourself, help somebody else, pass the information along. You never know when the information that you acquire will come in handy. Beyond that, I promise you the information that I give you, it will be accurate to the best of my understanding. I encourage you to fact check everything that I share with you, because well, for two reasons. First off, I want you to know that everything that I share with you is well vetted. And so if I'm not going to undermine my credibility by deliberately giving any bad information. Beyond that, because I only get less than an hour with you, and so if you do extra time outside of this researching some of the topics that I discussed with you, then that's going to expand your understanding of the topic. And again, that's kind of what this is all about. So if I offer my opinion, I will let you know that it's only my opinion. Ethically, I'm required to do so. But generally, I don't offer too many of those along the way. All right. So with that being said, there are a couple of different reasons why companies choose to participate in the drug-free workplace, drug-free safety program in Ohio, drug-free workplace program overall. The first reason is, and again, I'm going to be as completely honest with you as I can. What brings a lot of companies to the table initially are regulatory requirements. That if your company wants to go after certain kinds of contracts, you've got to, one of the boxes that has to be checked is that you have to have a drug-free workplace in place. And that's, now there's lots of other reasons why people stick around, but if we have to get those contracts going in order to keep money coming in order to keep everybody employed, and that's an important part of this. It's not the most important part, but it is an important part nonetheless. So beyond that, there's a certain employee satisfaction element of all of this. Just a quick show of hands to keep your blood flowing. How many of you have worked in another job? Okay, almost everybody, right? All right. So I want you to think back to those other experiences. And how many of you, at some point during your career, have worked beside someone or worked alongside someone who you knew had an active substance use problem? Okay. I really appreciate those of you who were brave enough to raise your hands. For those of you who did, who raised your hand with that, is anyone willing to share just in a nutshell what that experience was like for you? Just a quick summary of just how you felt when you were dealing with that, or what that was like. I know I don't mean to put anybody in the spot, but just if you're willing to share. Yes, sir. In the back.
Unsafe.
Okay, great. That's a great encapsulation. Thank you for sharing. That's one of the most common responses we get. For those of you who may not have heard, it was unsafe. Anyone else? So,
Unproductive.
okay, and that's the other one. That's the other most common response is unproductive or just frustrating in general. And a lot of the frustration comes from their lack of productivity, for their lack of dependability, or just they're never sure if they're going to be there or not, or when they do show up, what kind of shape they're going to be in. All of those things. And I'd like to address the second one first, but I'll come back to yours also. Because of that lack of dependability, because of that lack of productivity, because of those frustrations that well up, the workers who work beside those folks often start to feel like they're getting chumped. They feel frustrated, they feel taken advantage of. And it fosters a generalized sense of unfairness. It's not, why should I bust my back to the company when these other workers aren't doing their share of the load? You know, if any enterprise wants to be successful, everyone has to be rowing in the same direction. Everyone has to do their part. Everybody has to know their role. Everybody has to perform their role. So if you've got folks there who aren't carrying their share of the water, well then, you know, if somebody's leaning on the shovel while you're breaking your back, it's just it's disheartening. And what happens is a lot of times people start to foster resentments. They start to harbor resentments against the other workers who are putting them in that situation. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term resentment or not, but the term resent comes from two root words. The word re, or the prefix re, which just means to have something happen again and again, and then sent, and that means the root word to feel, like sentimental. And when that person has a resentment, that means they re-feel something over and over and over. Just thinking about it makes them mad. And when just thinking about work makes you angry, well then, that's not someplace where you want to be. And when you start to feel that way, you start to dread going into work. I don't know if any of you, are you familiar with the term dread? Just to hate something, to want to avoid it at all costs. Just a quick question for you, since we're being honest here. How many of you have woken up on a cold Ohio morning and thought to yourself, man, it would sure be nice to stay in bed this morning? Okay, we've all been there, right? You know, but obviously, you did the mature thing. You got up, you suited up, you showed up, because A, you want to earn a living, but B, you want to, you know, you don't want to let down your coworkers, you don't want to let down your company. You're grateful for your job. You know, but if you start resenting your coworkers, if you start dreading going into work, then it's easier to start making allowances for yourself. It's easier to start thinking, you know what? I don't feel like going in today. And you're picking up the phone and making those calls. You know, I've had people tell me over the years, there were times when I would call off just so that I'd wait until I had the company over the barrel, and then I'd call off just so they would see what the other person wasn't doing. Just so they would have to see it. So I wouldn't want to tell them, but they'd have to see it if I wasn't there. And when you start having those kind of things going on, it starts eroding morale. It becomes cancerous to the morale of the workplace. And before long, you've got this transfer of responsibility. You've got the folks who are supposed to be doing their job, who are coming in high and drunk and hungover and withdrawing, and they're shifting their responsibility onto the middle folks. The middle folks start saying, hey, this is crazy, why are we working so hard? They start feeling resentful, they start feeling burned out, they start calling off more often, or even when they are there, they're looking around and keeping score, seeing what everybody else is doing. They start shifting their responsibility over onto the handful of loyalists that are showing up and just doing their job. And every company has those folks who are just there, they just keep their head down, they just keep their mouth shut, they just do their job. You may be a loyalist. But even for us loyalists, when we're there, and we're not complaining and we're just doing our job, when all that starts getting put onto us, even if we don't ever say a word about it, you know what we're doing in our free time? We're looking at the want ads. We're dusting off a resume. We're looking for a different opportunity because we don't want to stay in a place where we're being treated unfairly. And all of a sudden, companies start looking around and going, wait a minute, we're getting all these contracts, we're getting all this work. We should be on easy street. Why are we losing money? Why can't we keep workers? And a lot of times because those types of issues are not addressed. There are regulatory concerns. There are employee satisfaction concerns. But bottom line, the single most important reason, the reason why you said so, was because of safety. That's why we do this. That's job one. Above all else, our primary obligation is our obligation as employers to provide a safe work environment that's free from identified hazards that are causing or likely to cause serious injury or death. That is job one. A good rule of thumb is that if we do not do everything in our power to create a safe work environment, before long we will no longer have a workplace to go to. It's that important. And so, for decades now, there have been governmental agencies that have been assigned to study workplace safety. And whether you're talking about OSHA or the Department of Transportation or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration or the Department of Labor or the National Institute of Health or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, I've been going on. One of the primary responsibilities of those organizations is that they study workplace safety. They look to see what's going well in the workplace and they promote certain practices. They look to see what's not going so well and make some suggestions about where some adjustments can be made around the edges to make things a little safer. And when things go catastrophically wrong, they study those events and they see what lessons they can glean from those catastrophic events to see what information they can share with other employers to make sure those same things don't happen in those workplaces. And when you look at those reports, when those agencies collect that data, when they compile it, when they release it in a digestible format, when they put together their findings, when they release their lists of the most common, predictable, preventable workplace hazards, right at or near the top of every single one of those lists are the hazards that are posed by impaired workers. Is that surprising to anybody? It's surprising to me. Honest to God, I find that mind-boggling. Even as somebody who has devoted my life to helping folks who deal with addiction issues. I'm an addiction counselor. That's what our primary focus is with my organization. That we help folks who have drug and alcohol issues to get to a point where they, are not dealing with those issues. But it's when I ask those questions in these classes, it's always a little surprising to me how unsurprising it is to my participants. I mean, y'all work with some pretty dangerous hazards out there in the workplace already. The biggest hazard that you have to deal with shouldn't be the person beside you or behind you or in front of you. But too often that's the case. Let me share one of those reports with you, and then I'll move on to some of those other things we need to talk about. 2016, there was a study conducted by the federal government on catastrophic workplace accidents. These were accidents that, in the term catastrophic, can be nebulous, so I want you to understand the criteria that they use for this. In their estimation, a catastrophic accident it was an accident that involved a fatality, where somebody was killed, a permanent disability, where someone lost a limb or permanently lost usage of that limb, or had a significant lost time injury, where they lost between 120 or 180 days. I can't remember if it was 4 or 6 months, but it was just a lot of time. So either fatality, disability, or significant lost time injury. And what they found was when they studied those events, when they looked at the results of the drug testing that was ordered after those accidents had occurred, they found that in 23% of those events, on average, almost 1 in 4 of those events was determined to have been caused by a worker who was either legally drunk or legally high at the time of the accident. Okay, those terms, legally drunk and legally high, those are important terms too. All right, so let me explain what they mean by those. In order for a person to be considered legally drunk, then the person had to have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08 or higher at the time of the accident. So if they got pulled over on the way into work, they would have been arrested for an OVI. I'm not talking about somebody who stayed up, too late last night watching WWE or stayed up watching a ball game or stayed up, late, toasting their anniversary at midnight with their sweetheart and came in the next day and had a little hint of alcohol in her system. I mean, that's problematic, but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about somebody who was legally drunk at the time of the accident. Or were legally high, meaning that they had a sufficient quantity of a controlled substance that was not prescribed by their doctor, by the way. Because if you include the people who are showing impairment based on prescription medication, that number would balloon even further. We're talking about folks who, in post-accident testing, had a confirmed presence of controlled substance not prescribed by their doctor to cause objective impairment at the time of the accident. So again, not somebody who went to a bachelor party over the weekend and sniffed a line of cocaine. Again, that's problematic. Not somebody who went to a concert 3 weeks ago and smoked a joint. Again, problematic. Or not somebody who was cleaning out the garage and tweaked their back and took a couple of their wife's Vicodin without a prescription. Again, problematic, but not what they're talking about. They're talking about somebody who was actually impaired at the time of the accident. 23%. And when you scratch the surface on that study just a little bit further and you look at the individuals who were actually hurt or killed by those individuals, 1 in 3 of the victims of those accidents, the folks who were actually hurt or killed by those impaired workers, was somebody other than the impaired worker themselves. 1 in 3. So what's that mean for us? Seriously, what's that mean for us? Sir?
Okay, that means we're at risk of, if we're the sober one, getting injured by someone who's high.
Absolutely, yeah, they're putting us at rest, thank you. I mean, they're putting our lives, our safety in jeopardy. And that's unacceptable. So, and if you extend it out to the highways, then the numbers are even more bleak. You know, out on the highways, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, 1 in 3 highway fatalities is caused by an impaired motorist. 1 in 3. How many of you use the highway system on a regular basis? How many of you use it today? So that's why we're doing what we're doing. The recognition that most of us aren't living to work. Most of us are working for a living. We go to work because we want to earn a wage. We want to improve our quality of life. We want to put in our hours, collect our check, go home, back to our lives, to the things that we like to do, to our families, to our wives, to our husbands, to our girlfriends, to our boyfriends, to our kids, to our animals. We want to get back home in one piece, and that's what we all want to. Right? So back in 1988, Congress passed a worker protection law to help us do just that. It's called the Drug-Free Workplace Act. And this law cobbled together 5 elements that have been proven effective in helping to mitigate the risks in the workplace that were posed by impaired individuals. And in order for any company to qualify as drug-free, there have to be 5 components present. Now the first is a written policy, which, and I'm going to go over all 5 of them very quickly. The first is a written policy, and the reason why the policy has to be in writing is for a very simple reason. That's to protect all of us from having a policy applied unfairly. You know, if you're going to have rules, you have to know what the rules need to be in writing so everybody knows what they are, so they have access to them, so they know, so they can make sure they know what the rules are, so they don't violate them. And so, in that written policy, there are 2 elements in every written policy. There are the protections. There are some protections that are afforded to every employee, from the brand newest hire up to the top management. Every single employee is afforded the same protections. We've got protections for confidentiality, and so that if you have regardless of the results of your drug test or whether you seek help with a drug or alcohol issue, that is nobody's business, and that's protected by the law. You've got guaranteed protections for due process, meaning that the policy has to be applied in a particular way. It has to be applied fairly. That there's only certain instances when testing can be done. There's only certain substances that can be tested for. There's only, there's protections that if you don't agree with the results of a drug test, you can have a second test done, or you can have your split specimen sent to a different lab. There's even protections for how your paperwork is handled. All those things are spelled out in your policy. But right along with those protections that are afforded to everybody are also some obligations. And the most basic of those obligations is the expectation that when we arrive for work and throughout our work day that we must be fit for duty. Now, the Society for Human Resource Managers, also known as SHRM, was kind enough to give us a working definition of fitness for duty that I think makes sense to most people. And it's got 2 elements. The first is that in order for us to be considered truly fit for duty, we must be sufficiently mentally alert and physically capable of safely performing our job responsibilities. So sufficiently mentally alert and physically capable of safely performing our job responsibilities. So if there's something I'm putting into my body that's interfering with my ability to be sufficiently mentally alert or physically capable of safely performing my job responsibilities, then I shouldn't be on the job. Right? And supervisors are trained to recognize those indicators of impairment, so if I appear to be obviously out of it, they're going to tap me on the shoulder and they're going to get me off the job before I hurt myself or hurt somebody else. That's one of their responsibilities. But you know who else is responsible for making sure the workplace is safe?
We're responsible.
Everybody, right? All of us are. Right? And so I'm going to ask you something that's difficult, but it's really important. What I'm going to ask of you is that if you see something, you say something. Maybe not in the way that you think, but I want you to hear me out. I'm not asking you to turn into a bunch of informants and run and tattle on each other and have whisper campaigns and all this. What I'm asking you to do is just to be a good citizen, to be a good coworker, to be a good person. And that if you see somebody who's obviously impaired, who obviously is struggling, who's in medical distress, that for God's sake, say something to somebody to get them some help. If you see somebody who's stumbling or slurring or bumping into things or having a difficult time maintaining consciousness or showing other signs of medical distress, then say something to somebody who can get them some help. Think about if it was you or your child, your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife, if it was somebody that you really, the person you love the most in the world, if you saw them in that kind of emotional, if somebody saw them in that kind of emotional distress, or that kind of medical distress, would you want them to get some help? And of course we would. Please keep in mind that in many of those instances, when a person is in that type of medical distress, it's not because they're high or drunk. It's because they're going through some kind of medical emergency. They may be having a diabetic emergency or a stroke or an aneurysm or a bad reaction to medication. Who knows? But I do know that in a lot of those instances, their window for getting help is about this big. And that if we don't get them help in a timely manner, our opportunity to get them help before their damage is irreversible is very, very small. It's just the right thing to do. And even if it is a drug or alcohol issue, many company policies have a pathway for rehabilitation built right into the policy. That as long as the worker is willing to accept some help, even if it is a drug or alcohol issue, if they accept that hand of help that's reached out to them, then they have the opportunity to turn things around. It doesn't have to necessarily cost the person their job. That they can get some counseling, get some help, get some accountability, get things turned around. You know, and realistically, in many of those instances, rather than costing the person their job, you actually save their job. Hell, you may save their marriage, you may save their life. It's an important piece of this, and it can make all the difference in the world. Any questions for me about any of that? Beyond that, there's annual training, there's employee training, there's supervisory training. There's also employee assistance program counseling services. How many of you are familiar with your company's EAP program or your employee assistance program and how it works? Okay. Because not many people will raise their hand, I don't think anybody raised their hand. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes going over this with you because this is really important. This can make a big difference in your lives. The Employee Assistance Program Counseling Services, or the Employee Assistance Program, is a system by which employees can receive confidential counseling and rehabilitative services through their employer. That if you have some personal issue that is so overwhelming that it's interfering with your quality of life or interfering with your ability to focus and pay attention and at work, if it's interfering with you to the point where often it's causing you to be distracted and unsafe at work, then you can get help through the workplace to address that issue so you can get that. You can unburden yourself, get that off your shoulders, and be able to recenter, refocus, and get back on with your life. Now, a lot of times, when people think about EAP services, they do think about drug and alcohol issues, because that is one of the biggest issues, that is one of the most common issues we help people deal with. It's not by far the only issue, but it's one of them. I mean, sometimes people who have always drunk alcohol, and maybe been able to do so with very little consequences over the years, all of a sudden start drinking more than what they normally drink. All of a sudden, it's like a switch has been flipped, and all of a sudden they start getting all kinds of consequences. Maybe they start getting in trouble with the law, where they get OVIs, DUIs, domestic violence charges, arrests, assaults, public intoxication charges, any number of things. And when they try to stop drinking, all of a sudden they realize that it's really gotten hold of them. It's a lot harder than what they thought it might be. Maybe they start struggling with prescription medication. They got hurt. Sometimes they got hurt on the job, or just got hurt, playing sports or whatever. And the doctor started pumping them full of medication. And by the way, did anybody see the recent study by the National Institute of Health on how long it takes for those opioid medications to start changing your body chemistry so you get addicted, or so you get hooked on them?
10 days?
5 to 7 days. But it could, there may have been some that are around the 10-day mark too. But it's 5 to 7 days that the body, like, changes start happening within your body chemistry that makes it so that you start craving more, that your body's natural pain blockers start shutting down production. It's really a very small period of time, and keep that thinking about how many doctors kept people on those medications for months or years, and then suddenly cut them off. No wonder a lot of the people had the problems they did. But a lot of times people come forward through EAP, and we can help them, connect them with the resources they need to get off those things. Sometimes people start messing with street drugs. Maybe they start running with a new crowd, or maybe they get involved in a new relationship, and the person that they're in that relationship with is using those drugs, and it seems new and exciting and and risky for a period of time, and then very quickly that takes over their life like quicksand, and they need some. When they want to stop, they have a hard time doing so, and they can get some help through EAP with that. All those things are common issues, but you know what? There's a lot of other issues that people ask for EAP services for as well. And I see a lot of young people in this room. And so I'm going to say something to you that maybe it might get some eye rolls, and maybe and I hope that this is never true for you. But I can almost guarantee you that at some point in your life some hardship is going to visit you. And there's an old saying that in all of our lives a little rain will fall. And sometimes that rain feels more like a monsoon than a sprinkle. A lot of times, it feels like a hurricane or an earthquake. Sometimes it can just shake us to our core. And sometimes that hardship is in the form of grief or loss issues, where suddenly someone who you thought was going to be in your life forever is snatched out of your life like that. Sometimes it's an illness, where your child is diagnosed with some potentially terminal illness, cancer. Maybe your parents diagnosed with dementia. Maybe you're dealing with some mental health issues, with depression or anxiety. Maybe you're dealing with financial hardship, where you've always been more of an ant than a grasshopper. You've done you've made good decisions. You've had your ducks in a row, but all of a sudden you have an accident and it's your fault, and you're getting sued. And now all of a sudden all that financial security that you thought was going to keep you safe is being taken away from you, or at least being threatened. Maybe your first time you're dealing with being broke. Maybe you're dealing with repossession of your things, or foreclosure, or eviction. Maybe you've invested all of your emotional resources into a relationship, where you thought that your sweetheart was the one, and you put everything into that relationship. You've invested everything. You've opened up your heart maybe for the first time, and you're getting married. You've gotten married, and you're building a life together, and then suddenly you got blindsided with divorce papers, where you find out that the person that you trusted is not trustworthy. Any of these things could happen to any of us. And when you're dealing with one of these profound life issues, it can feel absolutely overwhelming. It can feel like an unbearable weight on our shoulders. And I'll tell you what, even if you're the person in your group of friends that most people turn to for suggestions or for advice, or when somebody needs an ear or when somebody needs a hand, you're the person they turn to. You know what? When you're the one that needs it, it's a whole different kettle of fish. I don't care how good of a surgeon you are, you can't remove your own kidney. Anybody here familiar with Zig Ziglar? Okay. Those of you who aren't familiar with Zig's, it's Z-I-G-L-A-R. Zig Ziglar, in my opinion, is one of the greatest exports that the United States has sent out to the rest of the world, right alongside with Alcoholics Anonymous. Zig Ziglar is a motivational speaker. And I got turned on to Zig when I was in high school. Or, I'm sorry, when I was in college. I was a freshman in college, just after high school. My freshman roommate was I went to Mount Union up in Stark County, and my freshman roommate, his dad was the president of the Steelworkers Union in Timken. And he was this big, burly, just highly energetic, motivational guy, you know, and he gave me this little cassette tape. And for those of you who are too young to know what a cassette tape is, if you visit a museum, you can find them still. But he gave me this Zig Ziglar cassette tape. It was Success for Dummies. It's still available on YouTube for free. It's an audio book. It's about an hour long, and it can change your life. Honest to God, it's amazing. But I plugged this cassette tape into my cassette deck in my car, in my 1980 Dodge Omni, which I was very proud of, by the way. And I left it there, and it's so long that it actually broke, because the message resonated with me. It meant so much. And Zig Ziglar's got a lot of great messaging. Again, I encourage you, please, do yourself a favor, check him out. But Zig said one thing in particular that really stuck with me, and he said that most of us as human beings are one piece away from greatness. We're one piece away from getting to that next level in our lives. And it's up to us to seek that one piece from the people around us. Sometimes EAP provides that one piece for us. I hear people sometimes say, I don't want to utilize EAP services because I don't want to spend the rest of my life laying on a couch, talking about cloud formations. I think I saw a clown and a bunny go by. What's that mean? It doesn't have to be like that. For most EAP utilization, we see clients or we see patients, and we see them for 1 to 3 sessions, and we either resolve the issue or we refer to the issue. But I can tell you, a lot of times I see patients or clients one time. They come in, they present some issue, they say, hey, I'm dealing with this thing, what do you think? I give them a suggestion, they say, oh, that sounds good, and they try it and it works, and they move on. I never see them again. That's great. Sometimes it's more than that. But let me tell you a secret about counseling. And I'm going to tell you something that most counselors will never tell you. And I tell you what, since we're all friends, we just need to keep this secret in here, okay? Everybody go with me on this? I'm going to tell you something, and if it leaves this room, then they might come and try to take away my counselor decoder ring, and I don't want that to happen, so we got to keep it all just between us. If a person self-refers for counseling, the only job of the counselor is to get them from where they are to where they want to be in an ethical manner. That's my only job, is to get you from where you are to where you want to be in an ethical manner. So if they come in and they want to deal with this issue, that's what we deal with. That's it. That's my only job, is to help you achieve your goal, whatever your goal is, as long as it's ethical. Sometimes I hear people say things like, I don't want to go talk to a counselor. I had a terrible childhood. How in the world am I going to know that? I don't know that. I can't read minds. All that I know is what the person presents. You know what? And because as an EAP provider, none of us try to be all things to all people. We all stay in our lane. I primarily deal with drug and alcohol issues. So if somebody comes in, has got an alcohol with booze or drugs, then they're going to get referred to me. If somebody comes in with marriage and family counselors, we have counselors to deal with those. If somebody comes in and has grief or loss issues, they deal with them. If somebody has legal issues, then we've got attorneys that they're going to talk to. But ultimately, because we stay in our lane and we deal with what we know about, then generally, because there are very few new problems under the sun, when a person comes in with that issue that feels like this 10,000-pound boulder on their shoulders, they come in and they feel like their world's coming to an end, and they say, hey, I've got this thing here. When they present it to us, a lot of times it's kind of like Tuesday morning. We go, oh, okay, well, hey, try this, and it works, and because we've seen it before, because this is what we do. It can make all the difference in the world, and if you're not sure whether or not you think that, whether or not you benefit from EAP services, let me give you one simple exercise you can do. Take a standard book of notebook paper, turn it sideways, make a line on it, and put a 1 on one end and a 10 on the other. It's called a scaling question. And give the value to 1 at the one end of 1 meaning completely unsatisfied and 10 meaning as satisfied as you can be. And then depending on where between 1 and 10, then just ask yourself, how satisfied am I with my life right now? Compared to where I thought my life would be right now, where is my life? And if you rate yourself at a 5 or under, you could probably benefit from EAP services. Just some food for thought. Nonetheless, it's an amazing benefit. It's there for you, and your employer provides it for you. And this is not some touchy-feely, psychobabble, snowflake nonsense. This is provided for you because it's mutually beneficial for the company too. Because you know what? Even and I know that Progressive does a good job here letting you guys know this, but the most valuable resource for any company is their human resources. It doesn't matter how beautiful the facilities are, or how great their technology is, or how wonderful their vehicles are, or anything else. You know what really counts is if you don't have good people to get the job done, your business is never going to be successful. And so if you've got folks who have these types of issues that are interfering with them getting their satisfaction out of life, if you have folks that have something that's weighing on their mind so heavily they can't focus and concentrate on the task at hand, then they're not going to be as efficient, as productive, and as safe as they need to be for your company to succeed at where it wants to be. And the national statistics on EAP services are irrefutable. That companies get back about $3 in increased productivity, and increased safety, and increased efficiency for every $1 they invest in EAP. It's a win-win for both parties. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to beg you, if you need that help, please utilize it. Take advantage of it. Let you get the benefit while it's there for you. The other side of that coin, though, and this is really important, is because those services are made available for you, because your employer does invest in you. If you don't take advantage of it, if you don't utilize it, if you try to play it both ways, where you want to work in a good paying, safety-sensitive, drug-free job, and then you are knowingly coming into work high or drunk or hungover or withdrawing, and you end up getting caught violating your policy, then you're going to start yourself on a path of progressive disciplinary action that can lead to discharge from your position. If you need the help, it's there for you. If you don't ask for it and you get caught, you can be in real hot water real fast. Any questions for me about any of this? Is anybody going to say next year that you don't know what EAP is about? Okay. All right. Beyond EAP services, the last piece that I want to talk to you about is mandatory workplace drug testing. And there are a number of different services, a number of different times when your employer is going to require you to undergo drug testing. There's a number of different substances you're going to be tested for. I need to focus on one of them. This is a really, really important piece of this for you. There was a law that was passed in Ohio a while back called Ohio House Bill 223. It's also known as the Rebuttable Presumption Law. If you ever see those employment posters where they've got like all the different, they've got some OSHA laws on there and some minimum wage stuff and all that. Have you guys seen those posters up before? And they've got a rebuttable presumption square on there. A lot of people read it but don't really know exactly what it means. What that means for you is this. And again, this can have real life implications for your life, so please pay attention just for another couple minutes. What it means is that, what that law said is that if you get hurt on the job and your injury is severe enough that you require off-site medical attention, so you're hurt badly enough you have to go to a hospital, or you have to go to a stat care, or you have to, even if it's just for a stitch or for an X-ray, or just to be examined, because you got bruised up or banged up pretty good, then when you receive those services, at the time that you receive them, then this law requires you to undergo post-accident substance testing as well. And when you undergo that drug and alcohol testing, if any of the following outcomes come out of that testing, then it's going to trigger this rebuttable presumption law. Now, the first situation that will trigger it is if your testing shows you to be legally drunk. So again, you've got a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08 or higher at the time of the accident. So again, they're not talking about somebody who stayed out too late and had, on their bowling night and had one too many beers and came the next day and smelled like a little bit of stale beer or whatever. That's a problem. That's not what they're talking about. It's about somebody who if you got pulled over on the way to work, you would have been arrested for an LBI. Or if you're legally drunk, or if you're legally high. which means you have a sufficient quantity of a controlled substance not prescribed by your doctor to cause objective impairment at the time of the accident. Again, I'm not talking about somebody who, who went to the music festival and sniffed a line of cocaine, or went to the class reunion and smoked a joint, or was cleaning out the basement and tweaked their back and took the Percocet without a prescription. Again, all those things are problematic, but that's not what they're talking about. We're talking about somebody who, at the time of the accident, had a sufficient quantity to cause objective impairment right then, when the accident happened. Or, this is the third scenario that can trigger it, and this is really important. This is where a lot of workers, boom, shoot themselves right in the foot. And that's if the worker refuses the post-accident medical testing. And a lot of times, workers refuse that test because they're embarrassed, because they did one of those things I just mentioned. They smoked the joint, they sniffed the line, they popped the pill, they don't want their employer to know. And so when they get hurt on the job, and they go to the hospital, and the medical professionals are asking them, is this a work-related injury? They're not honest. They say, no, I slipped in my driveway home. Or they're treated and released. They tell them it's a work-related injury, and they're treated and released. They tell them, okay, well, your x-rays came back negative, you're going to be sore for a couple of days, we need you to stop at the lab on the way out of the hospital and take your urine screen and say, okay, then you just keep on trucking past, Well then, if you refuse that testing in those moments, then that's perceived as an admission of guilt. Your reluctance to test is perceived as that you're not taking the test because you've got something to hide. So if any of those three things come out of that testing, you're determined to be legally drunk, legally high, or you refuse the test, then the presumption, remember this is called a rebuttable presumption, then the presumption or the assumption, the position of the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, the Bureau of the state, is that you were impaired at the time of the accident. And because you were impaired at the time of the accident, then your impairment is determined to be the cause of the accident. Now, this is a rebuttable presumption, which means that the injured worker has the right to try to offer evidence to try to disprove that position of the state. But the burden of proof is on the injured worker. I mean, you've already got scientific evidence to say that you were legally drunk or legally high, or you had the opportunity to take the test to prove that you weren't, and you tried to mess around with that process. So now the assumption is that you're guilty, and so you have to try to prove that you're not. And it's a really tough lift. It's a really heavy lift. I mean, can you imagine being that injured worker or their attorney having to stand in front of a panel of insurance professionals and try to convince them? I mean, you've got the test results there in hand, and so, that's working against you. So you have to stand there and say, you know what, okay, I appreciate you taking the time to see us. Okay, look, I admit my client had a few cocktails with lunch, okay? I admit, okay, he was twice the legal limit. But I assure you, that had nothing to do with him driving the fork truck off the dock. Pretty tough sell, right? It's actually an impossible sell. And if that attorney, if that worker can't convince those folks of their position, then the final ruling on that is that their impairment was what caused the accident. And therefore, their impairment caused the accident was their fault. And therefore, what do you think happens to their workers' compensation claim? I'm seeing a whole bunch of gestures, right? It's getting thrown out. That's right, it's getting thrown out. Actually, the technical term is it's disallowed. They disallow the claim, they deny the claim. And there's been a strange phenomenon happening in our country for a while, and particularly in our region that I've seen. And the problem is that for a lot of folks, their wages have stagnated, meaning that even though they're getting occasional raises, their raises aren't keeping up with the cost of living. So even though they get raises from time to time, when they go to the store, it doesn't buy as much milk, doesn't buy as much gas, doesn't buy as much rent, doesn't buy as much whatever. And so in order to cut costs, a lot of workers do something that's incredibly risky. And when their employer offers them health insurance, they just gamble on themselves instead. Say, you know what, I think, I appreciate you offering it, but I'd rather have the money in my paycheck. You know, I'm a pretty healthy person, I'll take good care of myself, I'll make sure I don't get sick. And besides, if I get hurt at work, workers' compensation is going to be, insurance will be there, and that'll take care of everything, and so I should be okay with that too, right? But what if that person's impaired in the job? If workers' compensation disallows that claim, and they don't have health insurance on their own, what do you think happens to those? What do you think happens to all those hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills, or those tens of thousands of dollars of medical bills that got that stacked up while the hospital was taking heroic measures to try to save that person's life? Who do you think ends up being responsible for them?
Hey.
Yeah, it goes back to the worker. It gets reversed to the worker. And so now you've gotten hurt badly. You're hurt so badly, a lot of times it's going to take you a long time to recover. A lot of times the rehabilitative care, the physical therapy that you need has to be pre-approved by an insurance company before the provider will even provide it for you. So now because you don't have insurance and because workers' comp will pick you up, because now you have a pre-existing condition, so nobody's going to cover you anyway. So now you can't get the help you need to even get the therapy you need to even get better, or at least not for, it's going to take you way longer. And so now you're injured, you can't get the help you need, and you've got this mountain of debt. As if you need one more reason not to make this terrible decision. Please, if self-preservation is an impulse that you possess, please don't put yourself in a situation where, as terrible a decision as it is to put yourself and other people in harm's way, if you come into work impaired, you could not only end up getting hurt or hurting somebody else, but you could also find yourself buried in a mountain of debt under which there's just no escape. Any questions for me about any of that? Let me give you one piece of, I'll just give you a couple of minutes on medical marijuana, and then I'll wrap things up for you. I know that we're getting towards the end of the day. There's a lot of misinformation that's going out there about medical marijuana, about the state's new medical marijuana program. And so I want to just give you some good information to sort out the facts from the nonsense. First off, Ohio has not passed recreational marijuana. Ohio is not, I am not aware of any viable effort by which Ohio is even close to passing a medical marijuana or a recreational marijuana provision. The closest Ohio is likely going to come for a long time was what happened back in 2015 when there was a ballot referendum on a voter referendum on the ballot. So they had that issue 3, the responsible Ohio thing. Ohio had the opportunity to try to amend the Constitution to allow for recreational marijuana, and Ohio voters, turned it down 2-1. And so that was in 2015. In 2016, the legislature passed a very, 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 very limited, very narrow medical marijuana law called House Bill 523. And to give you an idea of how limited this is, there are only 21 catastrophic medical conditions that are covered by this law. And so these are like potentially terminal illnesses like cancer, AIDS, Alzheimer's disease. There are some ulcerative conditions like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel disorder, ulcerative colitis, some of the inflammatory joint disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, gouty arthritis, osteoarthritis, some of the different forms of neuropathy like fibromyalgia, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, some of the genetic conditions like sickle cell anemia, some of the chronic intractable pain, some of the neuromuscular conditions such as MS and Parkinson's disease and Lou Gehrig's disease, even some psychiatric conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder from military combat, a few others. And a patient can't just claim to have one of them. There's an incredibly high bar for the vetting process. As of, these numbers may have been updated since the last time I saw them, but towards the beginning of this year, about a month ago was the last time I saw the census on this. And as of the beginning of February, there were less than 2,000 or just over 2,000 Ohioans in the entire state who had been approved for this program. Now, in the entire state of Ohio, there are only 56 dispensaries that are going to be opened where patients will be able to buy the various cannabis medications. 56. Does that sound like a lot? How many counties do we have?
88.
We have 88 counties, 56 dispensaries. That means there'll be approximately one dispensary for every 1.5 counties. In some of the rural areas, patients are going to have to travel across 2 or 3 counties to get to the nearest dispensary. And think about the medical conditions that these folks are going to have. Alzheimer's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, cancer, AIDS, Alzheimer's, etc. But if they're, a lot of these people who are these patients who are going to qualify are going to have significant transportation issues. If you have 56 dispensaries and you've got about 2,000 patients that are approved, that means it's going to break down about 35 to 36 patients per dispensary. Can you imagine trying to keep a Rite Aid open with 36 patients coming to get their prescriptions filled each month? And there are only 353 doctors in the entire state of Ohio who've gotten the extra certifications, that extra credential to be able to make the cannabis recommendations. Besides that, marijuana remains an illegal drug at the federal level. And there are 2 sets of laws that pertain to marijuana policy. State laws that only pertain to the state where the laws passed, and federal laws that apply to the whole country. At the federal, and does anybody know which one of those, which law has more clout? If you have a state law that says one thing and a federal law that says something else, which one wins? Federal law, right? Because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. And at the federal level, marijuana remains a Schedule I controlled substance, which means it's in the eyes of the federal government, it's considered to be equally dangerous to heroin and PCP, and LSD, etc. It's considered to be less dangerous than cocaine, less dangerous than fentanyl, according to the federal government. I didn't classify it, I'm just telling you. And so because at the federal level, it's considered, in order for any drug to be considered a Schedule I controlled substance, it has to meet 3 criteria. It has to be considered to be a dangerous drug with a high potential for abuse and to have no FDA-approved medical purpose. That means the Food and Drug Administration has not approved it for any medical purpose in the United States at this time as of yet. Dangerous, high potential for abuse, and no FDA-approved medical purpose. So because at the federal level, marijuana remains a dangerous Schedule I drug which is dangerous with a high potential for abuse and no FDA-approved medical purpose, then that means that in the eyes of the federal government, there shouldn't be any state-level marijuana programs. Because if state law, if federal law trumps state law, and at the federal level it's not considered medicine, then we shouldn't have those laws. However, there's been carve-outs in laws, and so when they passed the big budget bills, Congress said that they didn't approve any money for federal authorities to interfere with state-level programs, as long as every aspect of the program was contained within the state where it was passed. So from seed to shelf, every state, every aspect of Ohio's program has to be contained within the boundaries of Ohio. So we had to have our own cultivation centers where the plants are grown, and our own laboratories where the medication is produced, and the own dispensaries where the medications are dispersed to the patients. And all that's true. There's 32 states that have those programs. All right. But those are only state level programs. And doctors in those states can't prescribe cannabis medications because doctors can only prescribe FDA-approved medications because it's Schedule I. It's still not FDA approved. So all the doctors in Ohio can do is recommend cannabis medications. Insurance companies won't reimburse for cannabis medications because, again, they can only reimburse for FDA-approved therapies, and pharmacies can't sell cannabis medications because they can only sell FDA-approved medications. That's why we have to have a whole shadow system of dispensaries where those medications can be sold. To further complicate things, check this out. The entire system in Ohio is overseen by the Ohio Board of Pharmacy. There has to be board certified pharmacists on site at all dispensaries, and as well as AMA approved physicians on site at all times. But it's not medicine in the eyes of the federal government. Right. But that's where we're at. So this is where the rubber hits the road for us. even though we're going to have this very, very limited medical marijuana program that's supposed to be up and running by the end of next month, and I have it on good authority that if it's not entirely open by the end of next month, that people are going to have to wait a little longer. That was a joke. Because it has been approved in this very limited sense at the state level. Where the rubber hits the road for us is this. Please remember that many of the regulations which govern our workplace behavior are federal in nature. Our workplace behavior is governed by federal OSHA regulations, by federal Department of Transportation regulations, by federal Drug-Free Workplace Act regulations, by federal safety-sensitive regulations, often by federal DISA regulations if you work in the oil and gas industry. So because so many of our workplace regulations are federal in nature, and because marijuana remains a dangerous Schedule I controlled substance at the federal level, then if you're working in a drug-free workplace, you still can't have marijuana metabolites in your system, even if you're living in a medical marijuana state, even if a doctor has recommended the use of a cannabis medication. And cannabis and metabolites stay in your system for a really long time. Again, I told you if I give you a statistic, I'm going to give you a source. If you look at you go to the Mayo Clinic's website. You guys familiar with the Mayo Clinic? One of the most widely respected medical facilities in the country. You go to the Mayo Clinic's website and you can click on their urine drug testing detection timetable. And if you look at cannabis, it says for a single use, it's predictable that a person will test positive on a urine test for 3 to 4 weeks for a single use of a cannabis product. If you're even a semi-regular user, you're looking at 4 to 6 weeks. And if you are a heavy daily user and then you suddenly stop because you want to pass a drug screen at work or for court or whatever, you're probably looking at 6 to 8 weeks from the time of your last use. So there will not be any window by which a person can be a part-time medical marijuana user and work in a drug-free workplace. There just won't be. And ultimately, if you look at what those legislators were trying to accomplish with this law, if you look at the illnesses that were approved, cancer, AIDS, Alzheimer's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, etc., in their mind, if a patient was sick enough to qualify for their program, they were probably going to be too sick to work in a safety-sensitive job anyways. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. That took us pretty close to our time. All right. Any other questions for me at all about this? If not, then I want to thank you all for your time and your attention, for sticking with me. You've been a fantastic group. Please make sure you sign in so you get credit for being here so you don't have to come back for that midnight session this evening. All right, thank you very much, folks.